can tell you a little something about it. I saw the twins this week.
You saw the
2 days ago. Yesterday?
You saw the twins' nostrils.
The nostrils. I saw the twins' nostrils. Yes, it was very, very cute. They were very interested with their noses.
FaceTime is one of those things that eludes them still.
That makes sense, right? It's a natural thing. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. Happy Super Mario Friday. Why? It is March 10th, MAR10, Mario Day. Yes, right. That's a great question. The November Project, which is a running group that just started up in, well, actually it's been around for a while, but I just started doing it on Fridays. So they make adults look silly, and it's a way to start the morning. So kicking it off in session after some very, very, very difficult issues. And long session yesterday. So yesterday was, many of you all saw that we were there for 4.5 hours. I was really proud of the Senate. It was the Senate at its best, debating tough issues, asking hard questions, thoughtful debate. It's fine to have differences of opinion in democracy, and I think that we showed that you can do it well and still move forward as a unit and as an institution. We're going to have another long day today. We're going to focus on a number of important pieces of legislation related to the Supreme Court cases, Bruen and Dobbs, and Maryland's response to those two, cases that radically have reshaped the United States approach to what was settled law. I'm very, very proud of our floor leaders, Vice Chair of Judicial Proceedings Committee, Jeff Waldstreicher, and Senator Don Geil, our new senator, who did a phenomenal job yesterday defending the constitutional amendment for reproductive health, and I think it deserves a lot of credit. She'll be up again today as the bill is back on the floor, and look forward to her continuing to defend that important piece of legislation. We have the Senate Bill 516, which is the cannabis reform bill. Had the hearing yesterday in Finance. I think it was also another 4 hours. So the Finance Committee went from 4 hours on the floor to over 4 hours in committee, and heard from, I think it was nearly 100 different individuals with thoughts about the cannabis legislation. From my general taking of it, aggregating it overall, it was, we love this bill, but we have one little change we'd like to make. And so add that up to all the different ideas. There's a lot of places. There's a huge bill, an 88-page bill. We're expecting to see the House bill over to the Senate sometime early next week, I believe, if they don't get through it today. And we'll look forward to seeing their changes. The Senate's going to have its own changes, and I suspect that we'll resolve these two potentially in conference committee sooner than later. We want to get this moving. There's a lot of pieces to this, and I think there's no such thing as perfect in legislation. It's doing the best you can to mitigate any of the potential unintended consequences that we can imagine today. So I feel very confident that we're going to get it done this year. Changing topics a bit, I'm sure that folks saw that the U.S. labor market picked up another 311,000 jobs for February, which is a pretty important note that we are seeing growth continually move forward, even though it is slowing. And so while we are still growing here in Maryland as well, it is at a slower rate than it was previously. And so that's what has led to the $478 million write-down, $77 million in the current fiscal year, about $400 million in FY24. This is what we expected. We've been talking about this and forecasting it. I think I've mentioned it in this room several times. That's why we've been judicious and thoughtful and prudent about how our budget, we left areas where in the case that things turned, we would be able to avoid making serious cuts to important values and services. And I think we're in a good place to withstand this new revenue estimate and still invest in the things that really matter for Marylanders and Maryland families. We also learned, no surprise, that Maryland was reaffirmed with a AAA bond rating. This is the weeds of public financing, but it really, really matters. It is the outside objective review of our finances, and what the bond markets are saying is that Maryland is a place you want to invest. If you want to buy debt in the United States, buy from Maryland, because we hold true to our promise, and that we manage our finances well, and we will pay back our debts. We have, I will say, the $400 million, while it is certainly we're going to be able to navigate it, it will make things tighter this year. And so some of the requests that have come in, as we've talked about, which were exceedingly inexhaustible this year, they are, we're going to have to be more realistic about what's viable. And we're going to continue to have to make sure that we're putting money away for the out years so that in the case that revenues change in a year or two, that we're still prepared. We want to point out a couple things that'll be voted today. Minimum wage is on the Finance Committee's voting list. This is the governor's bill about minimum wage, and I believe that an amended version of that bill will come out later today and will be on the floor for us to debate next week. That will also have the governor's TRICARE, the National Guard, a revised amended version of the National Guard health insurance bill that will be on the voting list in Finance today. Judicial proceedings will be voting on the Child Predators Act. This is a very, very, very tough issue. Lots of complicated legal history, but I'm really proud of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. They've worked really hard to try and adjust and account for the unintended consequences of potential costs and liability through both public and private, as well as provide a real way for victims to have redress and seek justice for harms of the past. We'll have another executive nominations meeting on Monday at 5. We've had a number of new nominees come in from election boards to local liquor boards, and so we're still expecting a significant number to be coming in these last 32 days, but we'll work through them expeditiously. We're keeping Saturday the 18th on the table. We have a lot of work left to do, so we want to make sure that we are as efficient and effective as possible. We'll keep that Saturday, but we'll see how next week goes. So with that, let me open it up.
Mr. President, I'll ask you about the news overnight that Transurban is withdrawn from the P3 and get your reaction and what you think you and legislative leaders want to see now that this is perhaps taking a different course.
Look, I think I know that there were some concerns and a lot of compromises around the Transurban deal. I think it is what it is. The deal as it previously existed is no longer, and I suspect it will be up to the Department of Transportation and the administration to pursue a different path. The problem doesn't go away. The challenge with congestion in the DC area remains. It's getting worse as people, while we still have remote work and it has not been quite as congested as it had been pre-pandemic, all of the information I've seen is that it is just gradually getting worse and worse and worse. We have to do something there, and it should be a multi-mode solution. I think Transurban was starting down that path, and I think that was part of where the costs came from that were potentially unanticipated and why the deal didn't go through. I think it'll be up to the administration to decide whether or not they seek a new P3 option or whether they consider something like the Maryland Transportation Authority. No matter what, I think it's really important that folks know that as this moves forward, the bridge and the 8 miles on the Maryland side of 495, it will require tolling because that's what the record of decision was. And so the federal record of decision requires tolling for that project no matter who is to build it. So unless we want to go back to scratch and start from the beginning, it's likely that any solution that moves forward, whether built by the state or a private actor, will require tolling. And so I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to look through and understand the larger impact moving forward.
As a follow-up, does Maryland need to do this as a P3? And if not, can Maryland afford to do it through public financing, given some of the financial news that you noted at the top of this?
Look, I think does it have to be a P3? No. Does Maryland have the financial capacity? Potentially. I think we have to see a very detailed financial plan. One of the things that I am concerned about is certainly in representing downtown Baltimore City, I'm very concerned that Baltimore has been left behind when it comes to transportation solutions. And so, there's a crowd out effect. There is no doubt that the congestion in DC is it's the worst in the country almost. The congestion in the Baltimore region is similar. And it is a multimodal solution. It's roads, bridges, and transit. We have to think about it collaboratively. I feel like our current secretary will. And there are innovative ways, not necessarily innovative, that we've used in the past, things like Garvey bonds or tolling, things like the ICC. So there are mechanisms that don't require the exhaustion of our Transportation Trust Fund. But what I will say, and I think this is something that we really have to set up for a larger conversation over the next 4 years, as we continue to see changes in transportation and electrification, we are going to have continuously growing strain on our Transportation Trust Fund due to the result of our gas tax being less in demand or less gas being used as we use more electric vehicles. That's great for climate change. That is wonderful. We want to see electrification happen. As it happens faster and faster at a faster clip, particularly the point at which insurance companies make it more costly or more cost-effective to buy electric rather than a combustion engine, at that moment, we will see a quick flip. And I think we have to make sure that here in Maryland, we're prepared for the long-term financial impacts of that. And so we're looking at legislation this year that will set up an opportunity to have a broader conversation, a blue ribbon commission around transportation to really understand the impacts of our current revenues and structure of the transportation transportation trust fund, and the infrastructure needs that are required, and how we can use this term to really think about how we're going to deal with the future.
Mr. President, I'm curious about your personal thoughts on the growing number of young people settling arguments with guns. And I know there's a lot of juvenile justice reform measures on the table and already in effect, but that's after the fact. What is going on that this is happening?
Well, first and foremost, I find it absolutely both horrifying and incredibly, incredibly sad. There is almost nothing worse than seeing the news that in my own district, a fight that had been happening between two groups that sadly it looks like there was some more information that we sort of knew that there were bubbling, escalating issues. The fact that a 16-year-old is now dead from an argument between youths, it is horrifying. It's totally unacceptable. And it's a sign that we are failing to fully address the needs of kids in need, that kids that are suffering. The access to a handgun, the idea that, and we don't know the details, and I'm sure we'll learn more as facts emerge about how and where the firearm was acquired. It would be great to see that an arrest is made so that we can have some level of accountability for somebody, a 16-year-old losing his life. We have a serious, serious challenge. And, this is something as a legislator that I think a lot about. What is the piece of legislation that will change this? The honest answer is that I'm not sure that there is a single piece of legislation. It takes every single one of us. It takes legislators, it takes the executives, it takes communities, it takes parents, it takes grandparents and guardians. Right now, we are failing to live up to the promise that our children deserve. And it is totally, totally unacceptable. We have got to put everything on the table. This is just a sign of a broken social contract that has to be restored. And it only gets restored when young people feel like they have a real path forward and that the even construct of picking up a gun is foreign. Right now, we have too many kids who feel like they have no hope, and getting to the age of 21 is a goal in and of itself. That is totally insane in a industrialized country, one of the richest countries in the world. We're not hitting the mark, and something has to give. So, I have been talking to partners all week. It's not just this week. I mean, certainly it hit close to home because it was in my own district. This isn't the first young person that's been hurt or killed this year, which is just outrageous. Something has to change. We have to have a different approach. And we're working with the Department of Juvenile Services. We're talking to local partners. We just, are hopefully getting ROCA to go to Patterson this week. And we've been trying to, fuse how do we deal with conflict resolution? How do we teach kids the skills to de-escalate? This is sadly, I think a product of the pandemic as well, is that too many kids are not well and are scared and are worried about their future, and spent 2 years being told that by being close to somebody else, you may be putting yourself in jeopardy because of a virus. All of this has an impact on a formulating brain. And I think you throw in a firearm and access to a firearm, it just makes it infinitely worse. And so, it is not one singular strategy. It is all of the strategies. And we just have to admit that we are not doing it well right now.
President Ferguson, speaking of gun violence, the Senate and the House are both putting forward legislation to address the proliferation of, concealed carry, as well as youth access to guns. How do you feel about what the Senate is putting forward, and are you in conversations with the House? They have some different approaches in their legislation. I'm
very proud of the work that our Judicial Proceedings Committee has done. I think this is a smart piece of legislation for what is a tailored issue. The message here is not that those who seek a concealed carry permit are the problem. That is not the message. We want a thoughtful regime in place. We want to make sure that those who do receive a concealed carry permit have the proper training and protocols in place so that they know what to do with that firearm. What this is, the reaction to Bruen, from my perspective personally, is that we are making a decision that in the state of Maryland, more guns will not be the answer. And so if we make it, I do not want to live in a society where we decide that the only way for us to feel safe is for more people to be armed to the hilt. I just fundamentally believe that that is a broken solution. And so the piece of legislation that we have in the Senate tries to send the message that we understand that there are going to be firearms in our communities, but we do not want to incentivize it. We want to reduce the number of firearms that are available, because what we know is that more legal firearms also leads to more suicides and more stolen firearms that are used in crimes. It is just a fact. And so if we decide that gun manufacturers are the right solution to the problem of safety and violence, I just think we will have failed as a society. We need to evolve beyond the idea that we settle arguments with guns. And in the meantime, we can't be a society where everyone just believes that the only way they're safe is by carrying a deadly weapon. That just doesn't work in the long run.
The House is scheduled to vote on the constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights today. The Senate and the House, as well as the governor, have been unified in expressing support for doing a number of things to protect abortion rights. Can you give us an update as to where that is
Package
now?
overall.
Yeah.
Sure. So the constitutional amendment, of course, will be is on second reader again today. It was laid over yesterday. I feel very confident that it will move to third reader. That we'll be able to take it up for third reader vote next week, either Monday or Tuesday. And we also have the piece of legislation that is about making sure that all of our public higher education institutions have plans in place to provide proper reproductive health care services to students on campus. And so that bill is also on second reader today. I feel confident that we'll move forward. I think there are a few amendments that we'll have to dispose of one way or the other, but we'll make sure that those conclude today and that we'll move it forward for next week. We have two additional pieces of legislation, one in Judicial Proceedings Committee, one in Finance. The Finance one has to do with data privacy and the health information exchange, and making sure that for providers and for individuals seeking services in Maryland that can be protected. We were waiting on some amendments from CRISP, our health information exchange entity, and so I believe the Finance Committee will be taking up that next week. And then on the preventing the extradition. Sorry, thank you. The extradition. Preventing extradition for providers or for women who seek services in Maryland. That will be Judicial Proceedings. They'll take that up to vote next week as well. So we'll probably have it by the end of the week on the floor.
And how important is this statement to be made, given the context of the national debate on this issue?
I mean, look, I think we had a once in 50-year moment where a settled constitutional law was usurped by 6 justices. This is a surreal moment in time, and so it's important that Maryland stand firm and show that we are a state where we believe that reproductive health, freedom, and liberty matter and are protected, and so we need to take the steps that are necessary to do that, and so we will.
On the budget and the write-down news that came yesterday, are there plans underway already? Is there a framework for how you might resolve the gap that you have between the House, the Senate, and the second floor?
There are a number of options. We were in a good place to start the year, and so we had a lot of flexible options. From the very beginning, the governor put forward $500 million for transportation projects, $500 million for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. So that was $1 billion of not immediate expenditures, but for down payments for the future. And so there is a bit of flex for the current immediate year that if we can only put, if we can shift it and put $200 million for transportation projects, that frees up a $300 million allocation right there. That is without even the cuts that DLS has recommended. I suspect we'll see some pretty significant cuts of things, just budgeting, increasing vacancy rates than what the administration put forward, or areas where there was a little bit of over budgeting for things that we think as you run the numbers in Medicaid or in other areas that we can find savings. And so I suspect that's to the tune of $200 to $300 million, which is generally, every year, there's $200 to $300 million of adjustments that are made just by the sheer nature of the size of the budget. And so I think we'll be able to get to it pretty easily.
Then if I could do a quick follow-up, the Blueprint Fund has a structural deficit, as does the overall budget, with these new projections. The Blueprint Fund was supposed to be getting this injection of $250 million annually from the digital ad sales tax that has been in court now for 2+ years. Are there plans to look at a different revenue source for that fund? Is there anything underway this session on that front?
Certainly not this session. I think that we're going to be monitoring it very closely. We're putting additional funds of surplus dollars into out-year costs for the Blueprint. I think that we also have to see over the next year what the Blueprint projections look like with any potential changes in the Medicaid automatic enrollment in free and reduced lunch meals, and whether or not that number pans out and lowers over time. So I think it's too early to, it's too far out at the moment to say that we're in any sort of, that we have any real deep financial concern. I suspect that as we get through this year and next year, we'll have a better sense of what the real projections look like, what a regular, moderately growing economy looks like with the higher interest rates. And so, I feel very confident in where we are at the moment, and don't think we have to have a conversation about revenues.
Following up on Danielle's question about the budget, how does this write down in the new fiscal information affect the state's ability to fill vacancies? The governor vowed in January to hire 5,000 state employees, cut the vacancy rate in half. Given what we know now, is 5,000 realistic and attainable?
I would say that's a question for the administration in terms of the feasibility. I think it's an aggressive goal. I hope they can achieve that. We are potentially in the budget, maybe adjusting that target a little bit to bring it probably closer to what I think is a maybe slightly more achievable. In the case that the administration is incredibly effective at filling these vacancies, which I hope they are, then I would imagine they'd come in next year with a deficiency appropriation, which is a perfectly appropriate and normal thing to do. And so, I hope that that's the case that we're in, is that they've been so successful in hiring that they need to make sure that those salaries are accounted for.
Let me reframe the question a little bit. Is it fiscally responsible to hire 5,000 new employees in a year, given the current budget situation?
I would say the answer to that is more about, are the services being delivered effectively? And so if it is, I don't think it's just about meeting an arbitrary target number. I think it's about making sure that we are delivering public services as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that's less about the budget crunch or budget impact and more about effective management. And I think I know that we have suffered in our provision of public services as we have seen the vacancy rate skyrocket across the board. From conversations with the administration, more and more is being found as being behind or delayed, or things just haven't moved forward. And some of it is pandemic related, admittedly. But I think that the vacancy rates growth over the last 4 years in particular has created challenges across every single agency that really need to be addressed. And so I think the focus, the predominant focus on hiring state workers and retaining state workers is the right focus right now.
Mr. President, is April 16th the tentative new primary election date? Because it seems like every time you want to adjust it, something else pops up because early voting makes it complicated. I heard Ramadan may fall into the early voting category there.
Right, so it's a good question. The date currently is over Passover. We've had conversations with our friends on the other side of the aisle. This is something that we don't at all want to see as a partisan issue. Any date that you select, inevitably there will be a problem. We have an amendment on the floor right now, and probably we will take up today, that sets it as the second Tuesday in May, which I believe is the 14th. And so I think that moving back is a little bit, I think, makes the most sense. If we move forward into April, we start running into Easter and Ramadan and other related issues, and the State Board of Elections has suggested that it creates problem with locations and sites that have, if we use a church or other public facility that is being used for another purpose for those weekends. So I think that we'll see the second Tuesday in May being the most likely answer.
We could do one more, guys. You mentioned the minimum wage bill is moving out of Senate Finance today, likely with amendments. Will the amendments include removing the indexing provision that you previously expressed in terms of?
I suspect that's where the Finance Committee will be. Look, at the end of the day, I think all of us agree that inflation has hit Maryland families harder than anyone could have ever expected when we passed the minimum wage increase in 2019. No question about it. And so I appreciate the governor focusing on this important initiative to make sure that families who are hit by inflation can see a higher wage for those families that rely on a minimum wage job. And so acceleration has always been the goal here, and I think that's what we'll see coming out of committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.